The wedding was the kind of event that people talked about for years. It was held at a sprawling estate in the countryside, with manicured lawns, twinkling fairy lights strung across tall trees, and tables set with fine china and sparkling silverware. The guests were dressed to the nines, designer suits, shimmering gowns, and jewelry that caught the light with every movement. Champagne flowed freely, laughter filled the air, and everyone seemed to be soaking in the glamour of it all. Amidst this sea of sophistication stood a woman who looked like she might have wandered in by mistake. She wore a modest floral dress that didn't scream high fashion. It was simple, maybe even a little old-fashioned. Her shoes were sensible flats, not the towering heels most women sported. She carried herself with quiet confidence, but there was nothing flashy about her. To the casual observer, she blended into the background, almost invisible among the glittering crowd. But invisibility has a way of drawing attention when you least expect it. As soon as she walked in, heads turned, not because she stood out, but because she didn't. People whispered behind their hands, nudging each other to get a better look. "Who is she?" one guest murmured. Another shrugged. "No idea. Did she come with someone?" It wasn't long before the whispers turned into outright mockery. A group of well-dressed women gathered near the bar, sipping expensive cocktails while casting sideways glances at her. One of them leaned in close to her friends, smirking. "Look at her dress," she said, loud enough for nearby ears to catch. Did she pick that up from a thrift store or what? Her friends giggled nervously, unsure whether to laugh along or feel guilty. But guilt rarely wins in moments like these. "And those shoes!" Another chimed in, shaking her head dramatically. "Honestly, does she even know where she is? This isn't exactly a backyard barbecue." Across the room, a man in a sharp tuxedo joined in on the fun. He raised his glass toward his buddies and joked, "Maybe she's here to bus tables. You think they hired her to clean up after us later?" His comment earned a round of chuckles, though some of the men shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even jokes can hit too close to home sometimes. Through it all, the woman remained unfazed. She moved gracefully through the venue, greeting those who approached her with a warm smile. If she heard any of the cruel remarks, she gave no sign of it. Instead, she seemed content to observe the scene around her, taking in the grandeur without being overwhelmed by it. There was a calmness about her, as if she knew something the others didn't. What the mocking crowd failed to realize was that this seemingly ordinary woman had been invited personally by the bride's mother. The two had met years ago during a charity event, and the older woman had been struck by her kindness and humility. Despite her quiet demeanor, there was an undeniable strength about her, a sense of purpose that couldn't be ignored. So, when planning her daughter's big day, the mother made sure to send an invitation, knowing that having her there would add depth to the celebration. But none of this was known to the guests, who continued to judge based on appearances alone. They saw only the surface, the plain dress, the lack of bling, and assumed they knew her story. Little did they know, beneath that unassuming exterior lay a life far more extraordinary than anything they could imagine. And soon, they would learn just how wrong they were. As the evening progressed, the woman found herself seated at a table near the back of the room. It was one of those round tables draped in white linen, adorned with a centerpiece of fresh flowers, and candles that flickered softly in the dim light. Most of the other guests had gravitated toward the front, closer to the dance floor and the stage where speeches were about to begin. But she didn't seem bothered by her placement. She sat, quietly, occasionally glancing around the room with a thoughtful expression. Her tablemates weren't exactly thrilled to share space with her. A couple sitting across from her exchanged awkward glances before turning their attention elsewhere. One man pulled out his phone and started scrolling, clearly avoiding eye contact. The only person who acknowledged her presence was an elderly gentleman who gave her a polite nod before returning to his conversation with someone else. For all intents and purposes, she might as well have been invisible, but invisibility can be deceiving. While the woman sat there unnoticed, a group of women nearby continued their not-so-subtle commentary. They huddled together, sipping champagne and giggling like schoolgirls sharing secrets. Only these secrets weren't sweet. They were cutting. Seriously, look at her, one of them said, tilting her head slightly in the woman's direction. Does she even own a mirror? That dress looks like something my grandma would wear. The others tittered nervously, though some looked uncomfortable. Maybe. She got lost on her way to church, another suggested, raising her glass to her lips. You think we should point her toward the exit? Their laughter grew louder, drawing stares from a few nearby tables. No one stepped in to stop them. It's easy to stay silent when everyone else is laughing too. And besides, it's just harmless fun, right? One of the men overheard their conversation and decided to join in. He sauntered over, adjusting his tie as if preparing for a performance. Ladies, I hate to break it to you, but I think we've got ourselves a gatecrasher, he announced with a smirk. Either that, or she's here to serve hors d'oeuvres. More laughter erupted, though this time it felt forced, like people were trying too hard to keep the joke alive. Some of the guests shifted uneasily in their seats, sensing that things were getting out of hand. Still, no one dared to speak up. Meanwhile, the woman remained calm and composed. She didn't flinch or show any sign that she'd heard the cruel remarks. Instead, she reached for her water glass and took a small sip, her movements deliberate and unhurried. There was a quiet dignity about her, as if she understood that words meant to hurt often revealed more about the speaker than the target. At one point, a server approached her table with a tray of appetizers. When he offered her a plate, she smiled warmly and thanked him, a gesture so genuine that it caught him off guard. Most of the other guests barely acknowledged the staff, treating them as part of the scenery rather than actual human beings. But she treated him with respect, making eye contact and speaking kindly. It was such a small moment, yet it stood out against the backdrop of arrogance and entitlement surrounding her. Back at the gossiping group, the jokes kept coming. One woman leaned forward conspiratorially, lowering her voice just enough to make her comment sound scandalous. Do you think she actually knows anyone here? Like, is she friends with the bride or what? Another shrugged, swirling her drink absent-mindedly. Who cares? She's probably just some distant relative nobody talks about. You know how these big weddings go, everyone gets invited, even the weird cousins. Their laughter echoed through the room, bouncing off the crystal chandeliers and mingling with the soft hum of music playing in the background. To them, it was all in good fun. A bit of harmless teasing to pass the time while they waited for dinner to be served. But deep down, some of them must have felt a twinge of guilt. After all, it's hard to laugh at someone without feeling a little uneasy about why you're doing it. What none of them realized was that their mockery was building toward a reckoning. The woman wasn't just some random guest plucked from obscurity. She had been invited for a reason, and her story was far more remarkable than anything they could imagine. As the night wore on, the pieces of the puzzle would slowly fall into place, leaving the judgmental crowd scrambling to make sense of their own behavior. But for now, they were blissfully unaware, content to revel in their assumptions and snide remarks. And so the scene unfolded, a stark contrast between the grace of one individual and the pettiness of the many. The tension simmered beneath the surface, waiting for the moment when it would boil over and change everything. As the evening rolled on, the wedding reception shifted gears. The clinking of glasses and soft murmur of conversations gave way to the sound of a microphone being tapped. It was time for the speeches, and the guests settled into their seats, some still nursing their drinks while others leaned forward with anticipation. The best man stepped up to the mic, his confident grin lighting up the room. He was the kind of guy who knew how to work a crowd, charismatic, funny, and just a little bit mischievous. All right, everyone, he began, his voice booming through the speakers. Before we dive into the main course, and trust me, I'm starving, we've got a few words to share about this amazing couple. He paused for dramatic effect, letting the laughter ripple through the audience. Then, with a playful glint in his eye, he added, and maybe a few words about some of our unique guests. The woman sitting quietly at her table didn't notice the sudden shift in energy around her. She was focused on the speaker, listening intently, as if every word mattered. But the best man wasn't done yet. He scanned the room, his gaze landing on her. Now, I don't want to embarrass anyone, he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. But there's someone here tonight who really caught my attention. A ripple of curiosity spread through the crowd. People craned their necks trying to figure out who he was talking about. Some even turned toward the woman, wondering if she'd finally get her moment in the spotlight, or if this was about to get awkward. "You know who I'm talking about?" the best man continued, pointing vaguely in her direction. "Our mystery guest. The one who came dressed like... Well, let's just say she might have thought this was a garden party instead of a black tie affair." The room erupted in laughter. Even those who hadn't been part of the earlier mockery joined in, swept up by the wave of amusement rippling through the space. The woman simply smiled faintly, nodding along as if she found the joke charming rather than cruel. Her calmness only fueled the hilarity, making the crowd laugh harder. But then something unexpected happened. Someone stood up, a woman near the front of the room. It was the bride's mother, her face flushed but determined. She walked briskly toward the stage, ignoring the curious stares and hushed whispers that followed her movements. When she reached the microphone, she gently tapped it, signaling for silence. The room grew quiet, the laughter fading into an uneasy stillness. Everyone could sense that something significant was about to happen. The bride's mother took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the crowd before settling on the woman sitting quietly at the back. "I need to say something," the older woman began, her voice steady but tinged with emotion, "because what just happened isn't okay, and I won't sit here and let it slide." Her words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. The best man looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. The guests exchanged nervous glances, unsure of where this was going. Was she really calling out the joke? In front of everyone? "This woman," the bride's mother continued, gesturing toward the unassuming guest, "is not just another face in the crowd. She's someone I deeply admire, someone who has achieved more in her lifetime than most of us could ever dream of." The room was so silent you could hear the faint hum of the chandeliers overhead. All eyes turned to the woman, who sat perfectly still, her expression unreadable. She didn't look angry or embarrassed, just composed, as if she'd known this moment would come. "She's the founder of Global Tech Innovations," the bride's mother announced, her voice ringing with pride. "Does that name mean anything to you? Maybe not, but it should, because her company is changing the world. Renewable energy, clean water solutions, education programs for underserved communities. It's all thanks to her vision and hard work." The stunned silence that followed was palpable. Mouths dropped open and heads whipped around in disbelief. The same people who had laughed at her mere minutes ago now stared at her with wide eyes, their faces a mix of shock and shame. The bride's mother wasn't finished. "So yes, she's wearing a simple dress. Yes, she doesn't flaunt her wealth or demand attention. But that's because she's humble and brilliant. She's proof that true greatness doesn't need a flashy label to be recognized." The time she stepped away from the microphone, the atmosphere in the room had transformed completely. The earlier mockery felt hollow now, replaced by a collective sense of awe and guilt. The woman rose slowly from her seat, her movements deliberate and graceful. She didn't rush, she didn't need to. Every eye in the room was already on her. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but commanding. "Thank you," she said, simply, addressing the bride's mother first. Then, turning to the rest of the guests, she added, "And thank you all for reminding me why humility is so important. True success isn't about what you wear or how much money you have. It's about the lives you touch and the legacy you leave behind." Her words hit like a thunderclap, reverberating through the hearts of everyone present. For some, it was a wake-up call. For others, it was a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. And as the room erupted into applause, the woman remained poised, her quiet strength speaking volumes. What had started as a night of judgment and ridicule had turned into something far more profound, a moment of reflection and redemption. The guests realized too late that they had underestimated her, not just as a person but as a force to be reckoned with. And now, they were left grappling with the weight of their own assumptions. The applause that followed her brief words was Thunderous, but it wasn't the kind of applause you hear at a performance or after a toast. It was deeper, heavier, filled with a mix of admiration, guilt, and disbelief. People clapped not just because they were impressed, but because they felt something stir inside them. For many in the room, this moment was a reckoning, a confrontation with their own biases and shallow judgments. As the noise began to die down, the woman stepped forward, her movements calm and unhurried. She didn't rush to speak. Instead, she took a moment to look around the room, meeting the eyes of those who had mocked her earlier. Her gaze wasn't harsh or accusatory. It was gentle, almost forgiving. And yet, it carried a weight that made people squirm in their seats. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady, cutting through the lingering tension like a knife. "I want to share my story with you," she began, pausing briefly as if gathering her thoughts. "Not because I need to prove anything, but because I believe stories have the power to change how we see each other and ourselves." She paused, again letting her words sink in. The room was utterly silent now, every guest hanging on her every word. Even the servers stopped moving, standing frozen with trays in hand, unwilling to miss a single moment. "I grew up in a small town," she continued, her tone conversational, as though she were speaking to an old friend rather than a room full of strangers. "My family didn't have much, just enough to get by. We lived paycheck to paycheck, and sometimes even that wasn't enough. There were days when dinner was bread and butter, and clothes came secondhand from neighbors or church. Donations." Her honesty struck a chord. Some guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, remembering their own privileges, luxuries they often took for granted. Others leaned forward, captivated by her story, eager to hear more. "But despite everything," she went on, "my parents taught me two things: hard work and kindness. They told me that no matter where life takes me, I should always treat people with respect and never stop learning. So I worked. I worked multiple jobs while going to school. I saved every penny I could, knowing that education was my ticket out of poverty." She smiled faintly, recalling memories that seemed both painful and precious. "It wasn't easy. There were nights when I wanted to give up, when the world felt too big and I felt too small. But I kept going. And eventually I found my passion: renewable energy. Back then it wasn't the glamorous field it is today. People thought I was crazy for wanting to focus on something so idealistic." A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. Not mocking this time, but warm and appreciative. She chuckled along with them, her smile genuine. "Yeah, I heard all the jokes. Solar panels? What are you going to do, power your toaster with sunlight?" Her imitation of skeptical voices drew more laughter, breaking some of the tension in the room. "But I believed in what I was doing," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I knew the world needed solutions that didn't harm the planet. So I poured everything I had into building my company. Long hours, sleepless nights, countless failures, but also breakthroughs. Slowly, people started listening. Investors came on board. Governments reached out. Communities embraced our projects. By now, the audience was completely absorbed. They hung onto her every word, their earlier mockery forgotten. Some wiped away tears, moved by her resilience. Others nodded in awe, realizing just how extraordinary her journey had been. "Today," she concluded, her voice softening once again, "my company helps bring clean water to villages, powers schools with solar energy, and creates jobs for thousands of people. None of that happened because I wore expensive dresses or drove fancy cars. It happened because I stayed true to who I am, a person who believes in making the world better, one step at a time." For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence was profound, filled with reflection and emotion. The standing ovation seemed to go on forever, but eventually the clapping began to fade, replaced by a buzz of conversation that rippled through the room. People were talking, really talking, for the first time that evening. Gone were the shallow pleasantries and snide remarks. Instead, there was a palpable shift in energy. Guests who had been quick to mock earlier now approached her with hesitant smiles, their body language screaming apology without them saying a word. One man stepped forward first, the same one who had joked about her bussing tables during cocktail hour. He looked nervous, fidgeting with his cufflinks as if unsure where to put his hands. He stammered, then cleared his throat. Look, I owe you an apology. What I said earlier, it was out of line. I didn't mean any harm, but that's no excuse. You're incredible, and I'm sorry for underestimating you. She smiled warmly, her expression softening. Thank you, she replied simply, extending her hand. He shook it, relief washing over his face as though a weight had been lifted. It wasn't just him, though. Others followed suit, forming a loose line near her table. Each person offered their own version of an apology, some more heartfelt than others, but all genuine in their effort to make amends. A woman who had been part of the gossiping group at the bar approached next, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. I feel terrible, she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. We were laughing at you, and it was cruel. Can you forgive us? The woman nodded gently, her eyes meeting the speaker's with kindness. Of course, she said, her tone reassuring. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after realizing them. Thank you for coming forward. That takes courage. Her words seemed to ease the tension in the room, allowing people to breathe a little easier. Some even laughed nervously, shaking their heads at how wrong they'd been. One young woman, dressed in a sleek silver gown, leaned over to her date and whispered, Can you believe we judged her? She's probably the most impressive person here. Her date nodded solemnly. Yeah, and she handled everything with so much grace. I don't think I could have stayed that calm. As the apologies continued, something remarkable happened. Conversations began to deepen. People weren't just apologizing. They were asking questions. A group of younger guests gathered around her, eager to learn more about her journey. How did you stay motivated when things got tough? One asked earnestly. Another chimed. Inodir, what advice would you give to someone trying to start their own business? She listened patiently, answering each question with thoughtfulness and care. Her responses weren't rehearsed or polished. They were raw and real, drawing from her own experiences. When asked about motivation, she shared how she kept a photo of her childhood home taped to her desk, a reminder of where she came from and why she worked so hard. For aspiring entrepreneurs, she offered practical advice. Start small, stay consistent, and surround yourself with people who believe in your vision. Oh, and never be afraid to fail. Her answers resonated deeply, sparking lively discussions among the guests. Strangers introduced themselves to one another, bonding over shared dreams and ambitions. The atmosphere in the room transformed completely. It was no longer just a wedding reception. It felt like a gathering of kindred spirits, united by newfound respect and inspiration. Even those who hadn't participated in the earlier mockery found themselves reflecting on their behavior. A middle-aged man sitting nearby turned to his wife and murmured, You know, I've been guilty of judging people based on appearances too. This whole night has been a wake-up call. His wife nodded, her gaze drifting toward the woman at the center of it all. Me too, she admitted, softly. She's not just successful, she's wise and humble. That's rare. As the evening wore on, the mood shifted further. The DJ cranked up the music again, and the dance floor filled with guests moving to the beat. But this time the energy was different. There was laughter, sure, but it was joyful, not cutting. People danced together, chatted openly, and connected in ways they hadn't before. Through it all, the woman remained a quiet anchor, observing the scene with a contented smile. She didn't seek the spotlight or demand attention. Instead, she let the moment unfold naturally, trusting that her presence had already made its mark. And it had. By choosing forgiveness over resentment, humility over arrogance, she had sparked a ripple effect that touched everyone in the room. For many, this night would become a turning point, a story they'd retell for years to come. They wouldn't remember the lavish decorations or the gourmet food. Instead, they'd recall the unassuming guest who taught them that true greatness lies not in wealth or status, but in character and compassion. And perhaps, just perhaps, they'd carry that lesson with them long after the wedding ended. As the night stretched on, the atmosphere in the grand hall had transformed entirely. What started as a glamorous yet superficial celebration now felt like something deeper, a moment of connection and reflection that none of the guests would soon forget. The woman at the heart of it all continued to draw people in, not because she sought attention, but because her presence seemed to inspire it naturally. Her humility, combined with her extraordinary story, had left a lasting impression on everyone. It was during the cake-cutting ceremony that she decided to make another gesture, one that would cement her legacy in the minds of those present. The bride and groom stood side by side, holding the ornate knife together as they prepared to slice into the towering masterpiece of sugar and frosting. Cameras flashed, capturing the joyous moment for posterity. Just as the couple was about to feed each other the first bite, the woman stepped forward quietly, taking the microphone from the MC. The room fell silent once again, curiosity rippling through the crowd. She smiled softly, her eyes scanning the faces before her. "First," she began, her voice warm and steady, "let me say how honored I am to be here tonight. Weddings are special. They remind us of love, commitment, and the beauty of starting something new together." Her words resonated deeply, especially after the emotional roller coaster of the evening. Guests nodded along, some exchanging knowing glances. They could sense she wasn't just making small talk. There was purpose behind her pause. "Which brings me to my next point," she continued, her tone shifting slightly. "I've been fortunate enough to build a life where I can give back, and tonight I'd like to honor the newlyweds by supporting their dream." She turned toward the couple, her smile widening. "You two have talked about opening a community center, a place where young people can learn, grow, and find opportunities. It's a wonderful idea, and one I believe will change lives." The bride's eyes widened in surprise while the groom looked utterly stunned. Before they could respond, she added, "So, consider this my wedding gift. Full funding for your project. Let's make it happen." For a moment no one moved. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sharp intake of breath from several guests. Then the bride burst into tears, covering her mouth with both hands as emotion overwhelmed her. The groom pulled his wife close, whispering something in her ear before turning to the woman with gratitude shining in his eyes. This is incredible," he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. "We don't even know what to say. Thank you doesn't feel like enough." She waved off his thanks with a gentle laugh. "Don't thank me yet," she teased lightly. "Wait until you see the paperwork." Her joke broke the tension, eliciting chuckles from the crowd. But beneath the humor was sincerity. "Seriously, though," she added, "this isn't about me. It's about using resources to create lasting impact. Your vision for helping others aligns perfectly with what I believe in. So let's do this, together." The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing off the high ceilings and crystal chandeliers. People cheered, whistled, and clapped until their hands hurt. Some wiped away tears, moved not just by the generosity of the gesture, but by its symbolism. This wasn't just money being handed over. It was hope, belief, and encouragement wrapped into one powerful act. After the initial excitement died down, conversations erupted across the room. The bride's mother hugged the woman tightly, whispering heartfelt thanks. Other guests approached her to express their admiration, many vowing to support similar causes in their own communities. Even the skeptics, the ones who had laughed at her earlier, found themselves inspired. One man muttered to his partner, "If she can do all this, maybe I should try harder too." The ripple effect of her actions was undeniable. By choosing to fund the couple's dream, she hadn't just given them a gift. She'd planted seeds of possibility in everyone else's minds. Younger guests whispered excitedly about ways they could contribute to meaningful projects. Older attendees reflected on how they might use their resources to leave a positive mark on the world. As the evening wound down, the woman slipped away quietly, avoiding any further fuss. She didn't stick around for the final dances or linger to soak up praise. Instead, she disappeared into the night, leaving behind a legacy far greater than anyone could have anticipated. By morning, word of her generosity had spread beyond the wedding venue. Friends of the couple shared the story online, sparking discussions about kindness, humility, and the importance of giving back. Media outlets picked up the tale, though she politely declined interviews, preferring to let her actions speak for themselves. As the wedding festivities drew to a close, the guests began to trickle out of the grand hall, their minds buzzing with thoughts and emotions that lingered long after the music stopped and the lights dimmed. The woman who had been at the center of the evening's transformation was already gone, quietly slipping away without fanfare or goodbyes. But her presence still hung in the air like the faint scent of fresh flowers, leaving an indelible mark on everyone who had crossed her path. Outside, couples huddled together under the starlit sky, exchanging hugs and heartfelt farewells. Conversations flowed freely now, unburdened by the earlier tension or judgment that had marred the start of the night. People who had barely spoken to one another before were suddenly deep in discussion, sharing stories about their own lives, dreams, and struggles. It was as though the woman's humility and generosity had unlocked something within them, a willingness to connect on a deeper level. A group of women gathered near the valet stand, their arms linked as they laughed and talked animatedly. One of them shook her head, still processing everything that had happened. "Can you believe it?" she said, her voice tinged with awe. "We spent half the night laughing at her, and she turned out to be, well, her. And then she goes and funds the couple's dream project like it's nothing." Another nodded thoughtfully, her expression softening. "Honestly, I feel so ashamed. I mean, we judged her based on what? A dress? Shoes? What does that say about us?" The third woman sighed, her gaze drifting toward the venue's glowing entrance. "It says we're human," she replied quietly. "We make mistakes. The real test is what we do after realizing them. She didn't have to forgive us or even acknowledge us, but she did. That's what makes her different." Their conversation shifted from guilt to gratitude, each woman vowing silently to carry the lesson forward. They promised themselves, and each other, that they'd think twice before jumping to conclusions about someone else. After all, they'd learned firsthand that appearances could be deceiving, and greatness often wore the most unexpected disguises. Nearby, a man stood leaning against his car, scrolling through his phone absent-mindedly. He paused when he came across a social media post from one of the younger guests recounting the events of the evening. The caption read, "Met a billionaire tonight. No, seriously. And guess what? She taught me more about success than any business book ever could." He chuckled softly, pocketing his phone and turning to his wife, who was waiting patiently beside him. "You know," he mused, "I used to think success meant having the biggest house, the fanciest car, the flashiest title. But tonight changed my perspective." His wife raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "How so?" "It's not about what you have," he explained, his tone thoughtful. "It's about what you give. That woman could have walked into that room dripping in diamonds and rented a private jet just to get here, but she didn't. She showed up exactly as she is, simple, humble, real. And somehow that made her wealth feel irrelevant. It wasn't about the money, it was about how she used it." His words stayed with his wife as they drove home in silence, both lost in their own reflections. For her, the evening had been a reminder of something she'd always known but sometimes forgotten. Kindness mattered more than anything else. Seeing the way the woman had handled herself, with grace, patience, and forgiveness, had reignited a spark within her. Maybe it was time to volunteer again, she thought, or find new ways to help those in need. Whatever it was, she knew she wanted to live with the same quiet purpose. Inside the venue, the cleanup crew worked efficiently, dismantling tables and packing away decorations. Even among them, the story of the mysterious guest spread quickly. A server recounted how she'd smiled warmly at him during dinner, thanking him for refilling her water glass. "She treated me like I mattered," he told his coworker, shaking his head in disbelief. "Like I was just as important as anyone else in that room." His coworker nodded knowingly. "That's rare," he said. "Most people don't even look at us unless they want something. But she noticed, made eye contact, said please and thank you. It's the little things, you know? By dawn, the estate was empty, save for a few stray flower petals scattered across the lawn. The wedding itself would fade into memory, its details blurred by time. But the lessons it imparted would endure. Guests returned to their daily routines, carrying with them a renewed sense of awareness and responsibility. Some started small acts of kindness, a compliment given freely, a helping hand extended without hesitation. Others pursued bigger changes, volunteering their time or donating to causes they cared about. For the bride and groom, life took on a new dimension. With the funding secured, their dream of opening a community center became a reality sooner than expected. Groundbreaking ceremonies were held, volunteers poured in, and soon, the space buzzed with activity. Kids gathered for art classes, teenagers learned coding skills, and families found support in workshops designed to uplift and empower. Every brick laid, every smile shared, bore traces of the woman who had believed in them enough to invest in their vision. And though she remained largely unseen after that magical night, whispers of her continued to circulate. Friends told friends, colleagues shared anecdotes, and strangers inspired by her story sought to emulate her example. Her name became synonymous with humility and impact, a reminder that true greatness wasn't measured by wealth or fame, but by the lives touched along the way. In the end, the wedding wasn't just a celebration of love between two people. It became a catalyst for change, a moment that challenged assumptions, sparked introspection, and reminded everyone present of the power of compassion. As days turned into weeks, then months, the ripple effects of that single night stretched far beyond the confines of the venue, touching countless lives in ways no one could have predicted. Because sometimes, the simplest acts, the quietest moments, leave the deepest impressions. And for those fortunate enough to witness it, the memory of the unassuming billionaire in the floral dress would forever serve as proof that greatness doesn't announce itself. It simply weeks turned into months, and life moved on for the guests who had attended that unforgettable wedding. The estate where the celebration took place was rented out for other events, corporate retreats, birthday parties, anniversaries, but none of them quite matched the magic or impact of that night. For those who had been there, though, the memory of the woman in the floral dress lingered like a soft hum in the background of their everyday lives. She became a story they told over coffee, at family dinners, or during quiet moments of reflection. The bride's community center opened its doors 6 months later, a vibrant hub of activity nestled in the heart of the city. Kids ran through the halls, their laughter echoing off freshly painted walls. Teenagers huddled around computers, learning skills that would open doors to brighter futures. Parents attended workshops on financial literacy, health, and parenting, while seniors gathered for book clubs and art classes. Every corner of the building buzzed with energy, every face glowing with possibility. On the day of the grand opening, the couple stood side by side, cutting a ribbon as cameras clicked and cheers erupted from the crowd. In his speech, the groom made sure to thank the person who had made it all possible, the woman whose generosity had turned their dream into reality. "We never got the chance to repay her," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But we hope this place will honor her spirit. If she taught us anything, it's that success isn't about what you keep. It's about what you give away." The audience nodded in agreement, many wiping away tears. Some whispered among themselves, recalling how the woman had handled herself, with such grace despite the mockery she'd faced. Her actions had planted seeds of change, not just in the form of the community center, but in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed her humility and strength. For one guest, a young woman working tirelessly to climb the corporate ladder, the lesson hit especially close to home. She remembered standing near the bar that night, laughing along with her friends as they poked fun at the mystery guest. Now, sitting in her small apartment months later, she couldn't shake the image of the billionaire smiling kindly, despite the ridicule. It made her rethink her own priorities. Was she chasing success for the right reasons? Or was she too caught up in appearances, titles, and external validation? Determined to make a shift, She started volunteering at a local shelter on weekends. At first it felt awkward. She wasn't used to being around people so different from her usual circle. But slowly she began to see the value in connecting with others on a human level. One evening, as she helped serve dinner to a group of homeless families, a little girl tugged at her sleeve and handed her a crumpled piece of paper. On it was a drawing of two stick figures holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. "Thank you," the girl said shyly before running back to her mother. That simple gesture brought tears to her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt truly fulfilled. Not because of a promotion or a bonus, but because she had made someone smile. She realized then that the billionaire's legacy wasn't just about money. It was about creating moments of connection, no matter how small. From that day forward, she vowed to live with more intention, focusing less on climbing the ladder and more on lifting others up.